Back in 2019, I was still pretty new to this Airbnb thing. You know, where you stay at someone else's place while they're not there. Sounded cool to me. So I decided to try it out for a solo trip to New Orleans. After scrolling through a bunch of options, I settled on this cute old cottage right in the French Quarter. Looked charming in the pics, and the guy, Theodore, seemed friendly. Little did I know, this Airbnb adventure would go from exciting to seriously creepy real quick. I flew into New Orleans, all excited to explore the city and experience its vibrant culture. When I got to Theodore's place, it seemed even cozier in person. It had that vintage vibe, with antique furniture and creaky wooden floors. I thought it was charming at first, but soon, it started to feel more like a set from a horror movie. Theodore was there to welcome me, a middle-aged guy with a friendly smile. He showed me around, gave me some tips on where to go in the city, and handed me the keys. Everything seemed fine until he mentioned the basement.
"Now, you won't need to go down there,"
he said, his tone suddenly turning serious.
"It's just storage, and it's off-limits for guests."
I remember nodding, thinking it was odd but not dwelling on it. After all, I wasn't planning on snooping around in someone's basement. I went about my business, exploring the French Quarter, savoring gumbo, and enjoying live jazz. But each time I returned to the cottage, I couldn't shake an eerie feeling. One night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard something. It was faint, like a distant whisper, but it was persistent. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sound, which seemed to be coming from beneath the floor. I realized it was coming from the basement that Theodore had warned me about. My heart pounding, I crept down the creaky stairs, guided only by the dim light from my phone. The whispers grew louder, and I strained to make out the words. It was a group of voices, chanting something in a language I couldn't understand. The air was thick with an unsettling energy, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tiptoed back upstairs, my mind racing. What was happening in that basement? The next day, I couldn't look Theodore in the eye, my fear getting the best of me. I decided to cut my trip short, make some excuse about needing to return home early. As I left the cottage, Theodore's smile seemed more sinister than friendly. I never found out what was in that basement, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to put the creepy Airbnb experience behind me and never look back. That charming little cottage in the French Quarter turned out to be a place I'd rather forget. A couple of summers ago, I planned a weekend getaway with my friends to the picturesque town of Sedona, Arizona. We wanted to experience the famous red rock formations and the serene desert landscape. Airbnb seemed like the perfect option for accommodations, so I booked a cozy cabin nestled in the heart of the desert. When we arrived, we were in awe of the cabin's rustic charm and the breathtaking views it offered. The owner, an elderly woman named Martha, greeted us warmly and showed us around. She mentioned that the cabin had been in her family for generations, and it was evident that she had a deep connection to the place. The first night was peaceful as we sat around a bonfire, sharing stories and stargazing. However, as the night wore on, we started hearing strange noises coming from the nearby woods. It sounded like faint whispers carried by the desert winds. We brushed it off as our imaginations playing tricks on us and went to bed. The following day, we embarked on a challenging hike through the Red Rocks. It was an exhausting but rewarding experience, and by the time we returned to the cabin, we were all looking forward to a good night's sleep. That's when things took a bizarre turn. As we settled into our respective rooms, we heard a knock at the door. Assuming it was Martha, we went to answer, but there was no one there. Perplexed, we checked the surroundings, but there was no sign of anyone. We dismissed it as a prank, or perhaps a mischievous animal, and returned to our rooms. Throughout the night, the knocks persisted, growing louder and more insistent. It was as if someone desperately wanted to get our attention. Fear crept in as we realized that the nearest neighbor was miles away, and no one should be out there at this hour. We decided to call Martha, hoping she could shed some light on the situation. When we explained the strange occurrences, her voice trembled as she told us to stay inside and lock all the doors and windows. She promised to come over right away. We followed her advice, huddled together in the living room, anxiously waiting for Martha's arrival. The knocks on the door continued, but we dared not open it. When Martha finally arrived, she was pale and visibly shaken. She explained that there had been unsettling incidents in the area lately. A man, whose identity remained a mystery, had been stalking Airbnb guests in the region. She feared that we had become the latest victims of his disturbing obsession. We decided to contact the local authorities, and they dispatched a patrol car to investigate. While we waited, the relentless knocking continued, and our anxiety reached its peak. We whispered among ourselves, wondering if this stalker was watching us from the shadows. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the area, but found no trace of the intruder. They'd assured us that they would increase patrols in the region and advised us to stay vigilant. Despite the reassurance, our vacation was marred by the unsettling presence of the unknown stalker. We couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, watching our every move. When we finally left the cabin, we were relieved to put the eerie experience behind us, but the memory of that disturbing weekend in Sedona would haunt us for a long time to come. A few years back, I decided to take a solo trip to a remote cabin in the woods of northern Michigan. It was a much-needed escape from the hustle and bustle of daily life, and I found the perfect secluded cabin on Airbnb. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pine trees and miles away from the nearest neighbor. It was the ideal place to disconnect from the world and enjoy the tranquility of nature. The owner, a friendly elderly man named Mr. Thompson, greeted me upon arrival and handed me the keys. The first 2 nights at the cabin were peaceful and serene. I spent my days exploring the forest trails and my evenings reading by the crackling fire. It was everything I had hoped for, until the 3rd night. At precisely 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud knocking on the cabin door. My heart raced as I stumbled out of bed, trying to make sense of the eerie sound. I quickly grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the front door. The knocking continued, now accompanied by a chilling sound, sharp, deliberate scratching. It was as if someone was running a knife across the wooden surface. Fear gripped me as I held my breath, peering through the peephole. There, on the other side of the door, stood a figure shrouded in darkness. My mind raced with fear and confusion. Who could be out there in the middle of nowhere at this ungodly hour? I considered calling the police, but my phone had no reception in the isolated cabin. The scratching grew louder and more frantic, and I knew I had to act fast. My only option was to confront the intruder. I grabbed a heavy fireplace poker and, with trembling hands, flung open the door. Before me stood a man, disheveled and wild-eyed. In one hand, he held a gleaming knife, and in the other, a torn, blood-stained piece of paper. His lips quivered as he muttered incomprehensible words. Terrified, I demanded to know what he wanted. He thrust the bloodied paper toward me, and in a shaky voice, he explained that he had stumbled upon the cabin while fleeing from someone, or something, that was pursuing him. He begged for shelter, claiming that his life was in danger. My heart went out to the desperate stranger, and I hesitated for a moment before reluctantly letting him inside. I couldn't ignore the fear in his eyes. As we huddled together in the dimly lit cabin, he explained his harrowing story. He had been on a solo camping trip when he encountered a group of menacing individuals deep in the woods. They had chased him relentlessly, and he believed they meant to harm him. We spent the rest of the night in fearful silence, listening for any signs of the pursuers. The stranger kept watch with the knife clutched tightly in his hand, while I anxiously waited for dawn to break. When morning finally arrived, we cautiously ventured outside, but there was no sign of the mysterious pursuers. The stranger thanked me for my kindness and swiftly disappeared into the woods, leaving me with the chilling memory of that fateful night. To this day, I have no idea who or what was after the man or if he truly posed a threat. That night, deep in the heart of the Michigan wilderness, I learned that sometimes the most terrifying horrors are the ones that remain unsolved, lurking just beyond the cabin door.